Hello there, welcome back to PlayStation Live from E3. We are almost done with day 2 of our big coverage here. It's Wednesday, we're broadcasting live from the PlayStation booth, and we thought it might be fun to gather some luminaries. You see the light that these folks are projecting? That's why they're luminaries.
Yeah.
I'm not a luminary.
So here's who we got. I'm gonna rattle them off. We've got Seth Luisi down on the end there. He's from Impulse Gear. You guys worked on Farpoint.
Yes.
We've got Eka from Uber Entertainment. You guys are known for Wayward Skies. You're known for Dino Frontier coming out on PlayStation VR. Right. Looking forward to that one. We've got Maureen Fan here, who actually works in the VR film space. So Invasion, a huge moment for the VR medium. We're going to talk a little bit about what that means for narrative. And of course, we've got Adam Orth here from First Contact Entertainment. That's ROM Extraction. We talked to you a little earlier before.
That's right.
And then this guy, Justin Massingo, PlayStation Blog.
What am I, chopped liver?
Yes.
Okay. That's fair.
Very, very good. So I want this to be a hearty and robust discussion about VR. I mean, this is an exciting medium. So I thought maybe I'd kick it off here, and I wanted to toss one off to Eka because, you know, Dino Frontier, it's a very interesting title. And I wanted to talk about how VR as a gaming medium can kind of bring about new gameplay innovation and where that could take us.
Right, so with Dino, you know, I'm a big fan of sort of a tabletop, looking at miniature things in VR, and that's how Dino came about. We see a lot of first-person things, and I wanted to see more third-person things. That's what really got me into VR in the first place, is like the idea of playing with scale. And now that we have, you know, move controllers and hands, there's a lot we can do in that space. So we explored a lot of that with Dino, you know, like how do you interact with building a city, how do you train dinos, and, you know, what does the UI look like, and things like that. So I think we learned a lot, and I almost want to start over and do it again, and not that all the stuff we learned over the last year. But I feel like it's still pretty early. There's a lot to explore in that space.
We've been talking to a lot of devs at work in the VR medium, and I hear that a lot. It's early days. It's like black and white television. You know, it's the 1940s. But you mentioned wanting to make a VR title that wasn't first person, that used a third person camera, playing with scale.
Yeah.
Now I'm going to turn my attention to Seth Luisi here, who worked on a killer game called Farpoint, out now on PlayStation VR, that uses the aim controller. I expect you might have a little bit of a different perspective on that.
Yeah, so, you know, when we first started working on Farpoint, we actually started working on a prototype. And part of that prototype was like, how can we really deliver that first-person, you know, shooter experience? Something that, you know, all these PlayStation 4 gamers would really want and really expect to see out of VR. So we actually started at the very basic level of just the controller and the controls. So, you know, we demoed an early prototype a couple of years ago of just a controller that was kind of a modified sharpshooter and DS4 thing, and then we continued to work on that and evolve it. And, you know, that was a big part of what became Farpoint, and having that controller there and being able to aim in one direction and look in another direction, and having something that you can very quickly, you know, aim and very intuitively use really broadened the number of people that could come and play it, and it actually solved a lot of other issues for us as well.
Yeah, so Eka, you mentioned earlier tabletop, and
yeah.
I think that there's a bit of an intersection there between people who are fans of VR games and tabletop gamers, and that VR can be strangely speaking, it can be a social experience. Mm-hmm. Playing it with your friends, taking it over to a friend's house, showing it to them. Even there are some games that are approaching kind of a social interaction thing. There are things where you hang out in rooms with friends, and there's one where you hang out in a bar and play with people. Do you guys see VR as a social medium, or do you think that it's going to move in that direction?
I do. You know, at First Contact, we experiment a lot with multiplayer and the feeling of how you actually interact with another person in VR is much different than getting into a game of Call of Duty or something like that.
Yeah.
No, there's nothing wrong with that, but it's so powerful when you just do one little thing and it's like, oh, someone actually did that. So it's very exciting and very social, I think.
Feels more tangible.
Yeah.
So,
I think it's going to be huge, and I don't think we've done enough experimentation with that, but so I was at Zynga for 6 years for social gaming, and we know that if you could just get, I mean, hardcore games is the same thing, you know, if you have a clan together, people are much more engaged, but if you can get somebody to just invite one friend or to play or do one thing with one friend, that increases your retention or engagement by like 5% because it's just way more fun. And it's a reason for you to keep on going back because it helps form the connections between you. So I was really excited, at least on the narrative front, experiences like Life of Us was really exciting and fun, but also Altspace is doing the virtual worlds that you can be in together, so I'm excited about more of that. Because it can be a little isolating sometimes in VR.
Maureen, actually, I wanted to talk to you a little bit because you've done these short VR films. Invasion, obviously, is a huge moment for the medium. And I wanted to ask you, I mean, from your perspective, VR is such a different medium. And in some ways, some of the work that you're doing blurs the line between games and film. And I'm kind of curious, like, where does film stop? Where do games start and film end? How do I say that? You know what I'm getting at.
Yes.
Either way.
Either way, you know what I'm getting at.
It's funny because I come from the game side more, and my two co-founders are from film. So we're always trying to merge the two cultures, and they're almost opposites.
They actually are. I've noticed that as well.
They are. It's like agile, even agile process versus waterfall process. But the best way I can describe it is that it's its own medium. So if you saw a little girl crying on a park bench in a movie, and she's too young to be by herself, you'd feel really bad for her in a film, but you wouldn't do anything about it because you're sitting in your theater seat. In a game, you go talk to her because you want to get more information, finish a quest, or become a hero. And in real life, you would talk to her because you're genuinely worried about her. And so with VR, what we're trying to do is have the empathy of film with the agency of game, but the motivation of life where you're actually talking and interacting with these characters because you genuinely care about them, not because it's a story about you and less ego-driven. And we're only at the baby steps there, but that's what I think VR can allow that none of these mediums can really allow.
Yeah, that's a really strong way of pointing that out. That's really good.
I agree. I was fascinating, and that's what's so exciting about VR is we're talking about the big issues here. I mean, this isn't like, oh, gee, you know, it looks a little prettier. Our shaders look better. We're using more polygons than ever before. And don't get me wrong, I love that stuff, right? Yeah. That stuff's fun. But this is big picture. I mean, this is a whole new world. And so I just love talking to folks who are living it every day. I think it's terrific. So on that note, we did put some questions out on PlayStation's Twitter account just to get a sense of what folks who are interested in VR, what they might want to ask you. And one question I got a lot, that we picked up a lot, was where is VR going? Where do we think the medium will be, like, say, 10 years from now? Impossible question, but nonetheless, fascinating discussion. So
yeah, I mean, it is an impossible question, but the thing is that the VR that you see now is embryonic, and it probably won't exist as we know it 2 years from now, right? It's always going to be changing and forming into something bigger. But you know, I think people feel like VR is always going to be this isolationist giant thing on your face, and that's just not the way it's going to be. I think probably everyone here agrees that, but it's in its infancy, and we can't even begin to understand how it's all going to turn out.
Totally, and it is in its infancy, and despite that fact, we've already seen so many powerful experiences come out of virtual reality. How do you guys find the process of working with this new medium, given the fact that you basically have full reign to completely mess with somebody who's in there? Like, how do you guys restrain yourselves from going too far and maybe making somebody feel too uncomfortable in certain situations? Or is that something you guys consider when you're making your games and experiences?
Oh, yeah. I mean, speaking for myself personally, and I'll let these guys also answer, but there's no moment when you go, oh, maybe I shouldn't do that, because it's such a powerful thing, and you kind of already know what you're going for, and you don't want to mess with people in a really bad way, right? So you already kind of know your limits, and it's very easy to understand them when you make VR. Yeah.
I think. Go ahead.
We focus so much on the immersion in Farpoint, making it feel like you're there, stranded on this alien world. We spend a lot of time just even on the 3D audio and rethinking about what feedback does that provide to the player, and just being able to accurately hear where the enemies are around you, and having the whole ambience of the wind and everything around you. So there's so much more that you can do to put the player in that scene that, you can see it getting better and better.
Was there a point when developing Farpoint, when putting this experience together, were there any moments where you said, okay, guys, I think maybe that's a little too intense. I think we might have some bad effects on people here. Do have to scale it back a little bit?
Absolutely. I mean, actually, that's part of the fun, I should say, is like looking at like what resonates, what really strikes a nerve. So, earlier on, people picked up on some of the elements of the enemies in the game. They kind of look like spiders, alien spiders, and I was coming up with some of these ideas and concepts. I'm like, well, what if they kind of crawled up and got in your suit, and you would see them on the inside of your helmet and going around, and but all of that just was probably too much. So just having them in there in the world and jumping at your face, a lot of people that was enough for them. So.
Or more than enough for some.
I believe you were going to say something.
I was saying I think that's why you see a lot of horror, honestly, because it is so visceral.
Yeah.
But a funny story is because VR is so new, there are a lot of conventions where you can show your experiences. And the first one we showed Invasion at was the future of storytelling. And a mother actually, after she watched Invasion, our first version, we killed off the bunny because we didn't have enough time to animate it, so we just came up with a solution like, oh, it'll be funny, it's
creativity
dark
through
humor.
constraints, right?
We changed it later. But a mom, she took it off, she said, I love it, but I would never show my daughter because, at least in a theater, if something scary happened, she could hear the adults in the room laugh and it would lighten the mood, or she can turn and I could tell her whatever I need to tell her, but she's all alone in this headset by herself. So the good thing is the final version, we don't kill off the bunny, but it shows like how important it is to be
Thank
careful.
Goodness.
And we showed, I think, 2,000 people the experience and kept on changing it based off of people's reaction. I think that's a really fast way to learn, is by putting a lot of people through and seeing how they react.
Yeah, totally.
I just want to say that when we develop our games, we tend to build it as fast as we can, get it in the hands of somebody who's never played it. It's just fun to watch somebody that's never done it to go through it and see what they try to do. And usually the things they try to do, like, we got to support that. Like, in Dino, like, people will pick up a meat chunk and try to eat it. We're like, oh, we have to support that. So a lot of our features and ideas and gameplay comes out of just play testing. I feel like we do that in regular games too, but with VR, it feels like when you have hands, you want to support a lot more play.
This is something I've heard a lot, that playtesting is especially important in virtual, when you're developing a virtual reality game. How does that process differ from what you're used to developing traditional experiences?
There are definitely two different animals. I think with VR, his point was really solid, because what you think, it's a lot easier to know what you think will work in a traditional game, but in VR, it's all new. And when we were making Adrift, like, we were really focusing on the movement of the astronaut in space and moving around, and we thought it was pretty cool. And we had some people play test it, and they were like, no, it should be more like this, and we changed it. And then I actually got an astronaut to play it, and he took off the headset and he's like, nailed it. So I was like, done. Right?
It's the ultimate compliment.
And not bad, considering you've probably never been to space, right?
Oh, I have been to space a couple times. I just can't. No, I'm kidding. Yeah.
Such a trickster.
Yeah.
I was about to change the direction of this entire conversation.
I'm leaving right after this, going back. Yeah.
Another thing, Justin raises a good point here, is different skill sets are required for building VR content. So a great classic one I hear is level design in VR. You have to almost look back at architecture. It's not like that in a traditional 2D game. There's a lot of smoke and mirrors. There's a lot of, things that are set up that look really right. But then if you could just move the camera into an impossible space, you see everything just falls apart. It's an illusion. You can't do that the same way in VR. That's really fascinating to me.
Yeah, we spent a lot of time on that. And, even when we were early on and interviewing artists and concept artists, I was telling them, like, we're going to put players in that world. So that art that you're creating, they're going to see it up close. We're going to immerse them in it. And yeah, it has a big impact, just size and scale of the spaces, even the view distances. And we mainly work on PC monitors when we're using the editor and developing the game, but we always have to go into VR to check everything. So how does this space look? Is the scale right? Are the sight lines right? So that has a huge impact on the overall end experience.
I think film-wise, you always can animate or do shaders based off of what angle on the screen you're in. But for example, Rainbow Crow, which is our latest, we just premiered that at Tribeca. We created a shader to make the edges really fuzzy because we wanted you to feel like you want to squeeze it and hug the animals and roll around the grass. but now you have to apply that shader to all sides because you can walk around it. But directors are control freaks, and so for film, you oftentimes want them to look exactly where you want, but now that they can walk everywhere, how do you still direct the viewer's eyes to where you want? And so we always have to design the set almost like, are you in the middle or on the side? And so at any angle, like in set design, at any point, you can still quickly look at the action, but it does require a lot more thinking than we used to have to.
It's almost like event planning.
Yes.
You know, it's kind of more like that than it is like, I made this awesome level. You know, where, people are going to come in through here, or they might come in through here, or they might come in through here. So we have to kind of reflect or like you put it, get them to see what we want them to see wherever they might be.
Yeah, and another thing that plays into all that is the mechanics of what you're designing. Like in ROM, we have these amazing arms, and they do stuff, and we saw when people would pick up the controllers, the first thing it would do would be like, oh my God, these arms. And I did that too, right? I was like, they make me feel so powerful, so cool. And that influences all the world and everything, because the whole idea is you want to empower people to do something that they can never ever do anywhere else, which happens in almost every video game, but in VR it's especially important, so yeah.
Yeah, I think an early example of that, an obvious where my mind went was Batman Arkham VR. People put on that bat suit and the gloves and everything, and then a screen comes down and it starts reflecting in real time the movements you're making.
20 minutes later, I finally leave, you know?
So people see that and they're like, whoa, I'm Batman, and just start like dancing around.
I was all bat-toosing in front of the mirror. Yeah.
So fun. Please, go ahead.
I was going to say, one thing that was new to me when switching to VR was the idea of social comfort space. When you're laying out a level, having objects that are too close to somebody, they feel it.
It's unnerving.
So weird.
Yeah.
It's like having a stranger too close to you, or you're like, whatever that is. That's something that we never had to think about in level design in a regular game.
Yeah, no, not at all. In traditional games, it's like, oh, they're very close to me. It's very intense. I mean, I think traditional games. I'm no academic, but my sense is that traditional games played on a television, they borrow more from the film and cinematic world in terms of the language and the visual vocabulary. But it's a different beast in VR. It's more like real life, which is the cheesiest thing in the world to say, but it's true.
I will say people are still, people are still afraid to have their head go through walls.
Yeah.
Or, you know, we have a table and they're like, well, I don't want to put my hand through it, even though it's not there.
Yeah.
There's still this idea that, it's too close to me, or I'm on a surface, or it's very different,
For narrative, the reason why you want to watch a story to the end is because you care about those characters and you want to see what happens to them. You either hate them and want them to fail, or you love them and want them to succeed. But because of this thing that you're talking about, it being real life, people think in Invasion, they actually believe that bunny is real. They would try to pet her and wave at her, and because they had a little bunny body, they would hop around the room, and they were sure the bunny was actually reacting to what they were doing when it was actually canned. But in the future, we make it so it actually reacts to it.
Yeah.
But that's something, like in a screen, if Deadpool or somebody speaks to you, you don't really believe they're really talking to you, but something in your reptile brain makes you believe they're real. And then so when the bunny was hiding behind you, people said, oh my gosh, I have to save her because I'm a bunny shield and I'm the only thing between her and these aliens and I need to protect her. And you don't get that reaction when it's not in VR, so it's fascinating.
Yeah, there's different mediums are good at different things, and that we're just figuring out what VR is great at, you know?
Yeah.
We've talked a lot about the way that VR can kind of trick people and make their brain think things that aren't necessarily really happening in real life. Do you feel like as VR becomes more ubiquitous, do you feel like people are going to start to get used to that and that won't really be the case anymore? I find that I'm still pretty surprised by things when I put the headset on.
Yeah, I mean, like, a good example is I worked on a VR project that never came out, but it was based in the real world, and it was like you could go to this place basically, and it lost all of its VR-ness for me because it didn't transport me, and that's what VR does. It it plugs you in and takes you someplace. So I learned a really hard lesson about that, and it's just really like amazing when you get taken away from where you are to this whole other place, and all these guys have all done that, and I mean, it's the #1 important thing.
It transports you if it's done correctly.
Yeah,
it physically feels like you've been moved to a different location. And it's just a fascinating medium, I think we can all agree. But unfortunately, I do think we're just about out of time. I've had a really, really great time chatting with all of you. I've learned a lot about the medium. And I want to thank all of you for joining us here today.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you. It was awesome.
So we have one more thing coming up here on PlayStation Live from E3, and that is something Justin here is extremely excited about. And that would be, well, why don't you just tell everybody?
Final Fantasy XIV Stormblood. I'm going to be able to play it when I get home. I want to go home from E3 right now. I'll stay for your sake, Sid, so that I can, finish out the show.
Thank you.
But as soon as I get home, I'm playing it. So we're going to be talking about that coming up next.
PlayStation